We're making the biggest decisions in history about war, trade, even land grabbing, based on half-baked understandings, half-baked thinking. We're going impulsive, tribal, or repeating conventional wisdoms without testing our assumptions. Democrats and Republicans do it. This podcast is for people who want to think past the scripts and test claims with evidence. I'm Michael Brown, and this is The Unpopular View. Who am I? I'm a 73-year-old boomer, the father of two teenagers. I've traveled and worked in over 80 countries over a 50-year period, including in Somalia, the Congo. I've lived with the Pygmies. I've worked with supreme chiefs of the Sonrai and the Tuareg outside of Timbuktu, along with their slaves, or as they're called, captives in the anthropological literature. I started a nonprofit that ran for about 10 years, and I've led white-collar teams for various organizations that are consulting firms and NGOs, and doing a lot of work for the U.S. government, mostly with USAID, the agency that was the first to be doged in this year under the Trump administration. I published two books. Here they are. One of them is on climate mitigation in the land sector of the Global South. And another, what was done 10 years ago, is on reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, a program that's an international program under climate programming that, of course, is not a priority anymore for the United States government, but is for other countries in the world. Why am I doing this podcast? The reason is I have one teenager who's in high school, a junior, and one who just started college. We took her down last weekend to South Carolina, and their future for me is totally unclear. They're growing up and starting their adulthood in a period of time that's completely different from when I was doing it in the 1970s. We're making huge decisions about war and peace, our engagement in the world, and America's place in the world without really thinking things through completely, short-term, medium-term, and long-term, in my opinion. We're making decisions based on assumptions that people aren't really testing. For example, that withdrawal makes us safer, and that we can do it alone in the world, that we can dictate the terms of how we're going to live, and that the world will wait for us while we figure everything out, and in any case, it's going to work because we are going to do it. We're running on tribal autopilot, where things have become so partisan, or I'm calling here tribal. It's my team versus your team. It's not necessarily what's in our best interest. And we're doing this in the name of 350 million people. We have an electoral process, and we assume once an election is won that means that everybody's going to agree with what's happening. But the unfortunate thing is we don't really have any debate anymore, and our leadership, who we put in Congress, is not really challenging any of the assumptions and actions that are going on. So there's no real debate happening. We treat immigration, health, security, the economy as separate, siloed types of activities, when in reality, these things are all linked in a way. And politicians don't want to speak about the real costs and the real risks of what we're doing, so I'm going to try. The stakes involved, the United States and the globe are approaching a boiling point. A lot of people are scared, not only in America, they're scared around the world. The world is watching us with military threats now. This talk about taking over Greenland. We know what's happened in Venezuela recently. And we seem to be doing things, sanctioning people without necessarily having a clear strategy, or at least a strategy that, in the case of the American people, we understand. Are we thinking strategically, or are we just lashing out? Millions of people in the middle, meaning who aren't on the partisan side of MAGA or aren't on the partisan side of the progressive liberal left, we're watching us dealing with complex situations that are getting dumbed down to red or blue slogans. This podcast that I'm launching here is for those that hate polarization and believe we can think things through better, and maybe we can get into a conversation that can lead us, at least for those of us that are somewhere in the middle, to a better place when it comes to complex situations that don't get dumbed down easily into just slogans. So what is this? We're connecting dots that we may not be seeing. In this podcast, what I'm proposing to do is identify dots and then try and connect them in ways using evidence, validating them, bringing critical thinking in. And then I hope, if this actually works, that there'll be engagement with viewers who are watching the podcast and that this will create a conversation and a little bit of momentum. I'm calling it the unpopular view because I'm challenging conventional wisdom on all sides. I'm not out to do that on purpose. It's just simply, it turns out that I'm somebody over the course of my lifetime that's often been challenging conventional wisdom. And I find that I'm doing it here. I'm going to do that here too. So what are we going to do? So we'll start with taking narratives. We'll test the narratives against whatever evidence we have. We'll analyze that, we'll bring in critical thinking, and then we'll share that synthesis. And then you, as viewers, can decide what, if there's any value in that at all, and it might in turn stimulate you to have conversations with other people in terms of thinking about situations that you may have been thinking about in a different way. So let's get started with how we know what's true. The truth problem. There's a big problem today. We're having real problems in knowing what's true. Everybody's coming in with their own truth. Everyone claims they have the facts. So how do we sort this out? I'm suggesting, and this is going to sound overly academic, I don't want it to be, but I don't know what else to do. There are 5 tiers that I'm going to propose. It's a simple ladder for judging credibility. Tier 1 involves behaviors. What are people actually doing? Where is money going? Are people lying? Budgets, let's look at budgets. Budgets don't lie necessarily. They're just numbers. So we'll be trying to look at different types of information or data, and that's in terms of what people have done so that we can look at that. Then there's firsthand information. Because I've had a certain amount of experience in the world, I'll bring what I personally have seen or experienced or concluded from my own experience. It's vivid, but you can't take that alone. That's dangerous. So it's just a personal viewpoint that we'll bring in. Then there's convergence. There are different sources of information. There are different incentives that people who are generating the information are coming with. So we'll see if different people with different incentives are coming to the same conclusion and they're converging, that's going to be fairly powerful in terms of what it tells us about so-called truth. The 4th tier is falsifiability. Is there a clear way to prove that something is wrong? If there isn't a test for something, that's just a belief. And if there is, that's a really important criterion. Then the final one is track record, tier 5. Have predictions been accurate over time? If you're right once, it's lucky. If you've been right for years, there's a certain amount of credibility. So those are the different types of sources that I'll be referring to, not only in this podcast, but in this whole series, to try and figure out what is it that's actually true. I don't see other people doing that type of approach to figuring out what's true, but I'm going to give it a shot and see if anybody else agrees with me. You can conclude on your own whether it's worthwhile or not. So these aren't check boxes. They're just different kinds of evidence. And the more the tiers align, the more confident we can be in what's going on. So the structure of how the podcasts are going to work, not just this one, but the ones that are forthcoming, there'll be a narrative, a dominant story. Is the dominant story half-truths or is it solid? I find, in fact, that if you listen to MAGA or if you listen to the progressive left, there are some things that you hear on the side of MAGA that you can say, yeah, that's partially true. And on the side of the progressive left, there are some things that are true. But these half-truths don't lead to a conclusive, real story of truth. They're simply partial truths, which then they're twisted into ways that tell narratives that end up being unsatisfying, that lead to actions that aren't really justified. So after the narrative is identified, then we'll get to ground truthing. We'll evidence check, and we'll do that based on field experience. In the unpopular view, this podcast, we're going to attempt to synthesize all the different sides of information to figure out if there's a bridge, if there's a common ground, and where can we go from here. In the coming episodes, I'm just going to give you, this is like a little bit of a sampler. And it's not necessarily in the order of how things are going to be done. We're going to be talking about Congolese pygmies and the tropical forest in the Congo, the tropical forest in the Amazon. Should we care about what's going on in remote tropical forests that we have some knowledge about from National Geographic or TV shows, but that we ourselves perhaps haven't experienced? I have been fortunate in my lifetime to have spent quite a bit of time in the tropical forest, so that's one topic we'll get to. Second topic, still somewhat in that tropical forest zone, smartphone minerals. A lot of smartphone minerals that we get come from the tropical forest, coltan and cobalt in particular. And what we don't know about that particular topic is that there's a lot of human rights abuse labor that goes into extracting the minerals that we have in our phones, which is unfortunate, and we don't think about it, but do we care? Should we care? Third topic is involved having teenagers. I happen to be an old guy. I'm a boomer. I have kids. I don't even have any grandkids. I got kids and I'm dealing with kids. So my perspective in these kids is quite a bit different, I find, than parents that, or let's call them my colleagues, because they're not exactly my peers, but in a way they are. So one of the topics we're going to be talking about, having kids at 73, there's more guys I know that have started having kids at an older age, and women too. And then finally, then it's actually not finally, we're going to have a topic on just Generation Z in the future. There's a lot of things to talk about there. No need to even mention what they are. Finally, this is a weird one. I nearly died the day of my daughter's graduation this year from high school from sepsis. Sepsis is a infection that you get, and I'm not even going to describe exactly how I got it, but I nearly died from sepsis, and it had to do with markers that were for a certain test that I took that led people to believe that maybe I have cancer. I nearly died from the sepsis, but then the hospital system saved me. But there's a topic, and it involves prostate cancer for men, for older men. The way we do it in the United States, the way the medical profession does it, and its standard is completely different from the standard in Europe. Should we reconsider that? So that's mainly a topic for older men, but I think younger people might even find that one interesting, especially guys, because everybody's got a prostate. Next week's topic's going to be, it's actually not next week, it's going to be 2 weeks, it's going to be a bi-weekly thing. It's going to be about Somali fraud in Minnesota and fraud in the U.S. in general. But that particular podcast is going to be relating my experience with fraud in Somalia in the 1980s, and I do have direct experience, and I nearly died from that, and how I think that relates to what happened in Minnesota with the Somali community. And then what's really going on with fraud in the United States in SNAP programs and other HHS programming that I think is tar and feathering the Somali community, not really in the best way. So let's apply this method to today's biggest question: should America withdraw from the world? It's a zero-sum story. The story goes something like this: America wins when we stop losing in the world. Every dollar we spend abroad is stolen from Americans. Cutting agencies like USAID entirely is perfect. We got to do that because they're a waste of time and waste of money. And global engagement is just a net cost. The irony is, after massive cuts that were done across government agencies, starting with the United States Agency for International Development, the Trump administration then had to rehire a lot of people that were doged, and that's so that there could be continuity with health sector work, which this administration is agreeing there is some need for that. I was one person out of thousands of people that were impacted by these cuts, not because I worked for USAID, but I worked in a sector that did receive funding from USAID, and in particular, in my case, mostly with environment sector issues and a bit with governance. But all of this was labeled, as people know, as a waste of taxpayer money. What's the context in which we should be thinking about disengagement in the world and about what we should be investing in? I don't think that the context involves any one party. It's true, and I completely believe that this administration is right to worry about the economically pinched middle class, and a lot of that, and people that have lost their jobs in Rust Belt states. This is an issue, and we as a country haven't really dealt with that particularly coherently. We also know that job growth is weak, and it's been the weakest since 2003, with 50,000 jobs only that were new jobs in December. Youth unemployment is over 10%, it's doubled the overall rate. Meanwhile, this administration is flooding the zone, this expression, flooding the zone daily with so much stuff we can't keep up with it. It's creating a lot of chaos for Americans. Social media, which I personally think net has been a net more negative than a positive, just amplifies the chaos that's going on. It's hard to think straight when you're drowning in noise. We are drowning in noise. It's not an accident. I think that America is dumbing down. It's not that Americans are dumb, but we are dumbing down the way we think about complex problems, and we're oversimplifying things that actually are more complicated than they are, and we need to approach things in a much more systematic and rational way. Part of the context, too, is that billionaires are getting richer. We have so much income inequality. We have so much wealth inequality. Institutions are crumbling. And then people in the middle that used to be called middle class, but may not even warrant that term anymore, everybody's asking, what are we getting? What's going on in this country? Many people are understandably asking, why spend money abroad when we're struggling at home? I think that is a fair question, but it's a question that needs to be discussed, as opposed to just saying, this is all a waste of taxpayer money. We're not thinking through the benefits that we may be getting when we do spend money abroad. The assumption is withdrawing from the world saves money and reduces risks. And at the same time, what we're saying these days is we take what we need from other countries. We take oil from Venezuela. We're going to take minerals from the DRC because we just apparently established a peace treaty between Rwanda and the DRC that's going to enable the United States to get critical minerals. We'll see if that's really true. I've spent a lot of time in the DRC. I've spent years working in the DRC. I've spent time working in Rwanda. I was involved after the genocide in the first so-called conflict vulnerability assessment to see if Rwanda was potentially on the precipice of another genocide after the first one. I'm not sure if the peace treaty, the deal that was done is really going to hold, but we'll see. Let's be optimistic about that. The popular narrative is we're spending abroad, as I said, wasted taxpayer money, and that American soft power, we talk about soft power, that it's a myth, it's expensive, and it's just a distraction. We don't need to think about it. But is it true? Do we objectively consider the cost of withdrawal? The narrative is simplistic, just a waste. Is it really? I don't think so. Let's run through all the 5 tiers and apply that to whether it's a waste. In terms of behavior, the United States cuts to the State Department, USAID, governance, all of the governance program that we supported other countries in the world has all been gutted. Aid to Africa for health is down 49%. But we're ramping up military threats in Venezuela and Greenland, and we're going to do things, quote unquote, the hard way if we have to get what we want. Meanwhile, China, which has been an obsession of people for a long time, China is securing mineral wealth in the DRC. 90% of the cobalt that is used in the world for technology comes out of the DRC. Most copper comes, not most, but a lot of copper comes out of Zambia and the DRC. Lithium comes out of Mali and Zimbabwe. $10 billion has been spent in a Congo dam project and ports across East Africa, mining rights for infrastructure that we used to build. This is the Chinese doing it. They have their Belt and Road Initiative that spent $123 billion in 2025 that's filling the vacuum that we left behind. 30 years ago, the United States was the major player in Africa. Now, the United States has virtually no presence. Is that a wise thing for us to have no presence in Africa? That is debatable. China's controlling the copper, the cobalt, lithium that our economy depends on. We want our electric grid. We have a lot of problems with it. We're talking about building all these AI data centers. And then there's EVs. And I know this administration doesn't particularly like EVs, but I know Elon Musk does. Where is the copper coming from? we mine all of our copper. We don't mine copper in the United States in particular. And mining, whether it's copper or other minerals, is not mined in particular in the United States. It's rare because we have so many environmental regulations. Many in the environmental sector really like this. There are others that don't and are trying to figure out, where are we getting these minerals from? Well, we're getting them from places where there's a lot of human rights abuses, and we're dependent, in fact, on other countries that have weak governance systems and a lot of corruption for getting these minerals. Is that logical? We negotiate with China, not with source countries for minerals. So we've lost our leverage and prices are higher. So with COVID, we went through a couple of years of COVID. It was tough. It cost the United States $14 trillion is estimated. If we had gone about preventing the possibility for COVID to spread, if we thought about I don't know if the Wuhan, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories about Wuhan and China and a lot of discussion about the sourcing of COVID, but there could have been prevention of COVID, just like there can be prevention of other communicable diseases if we invest certain amounts of money in that. Whereas we deal with the aftermath because we don't want to spend the money up front. Is that the smart thing to do? The second tier, firsthand information. In Somalia, I lived in Somalia in the 1980s. It's the first real job I had after I used to be a cab driver, house painter, did some construction work and did different jobs like that. And I ended up getting a job in Somalia in the early 1980s, and I was a socioeconomist on what became the biggest rangeland management project that I think was ever funded in Africa, maybe in the world. I don't know. It was a $100 million project in the 1980s. That's a lot of money. What's interesting is, and this is going to relate to the second podcast that we're going to do, is we didn't really learn very much from our experience in Somalia. We didn't learn too much. The whole Black Hawk Down experience, that was a movie was made out of the cherry picking of warlords and clan leaders, one over the other. I wrote Bill Clinton a letter saying that, you're not going about, dealing with Somalia and the warlords and the clan leaders in a very coherent way. And the net result of that has been decades of instability and terrorism, migration to our shores. And like I said, that we're going to get into that story a little bit later. But anyway, the point is this tier 2 information that we're going to deal with in the podcast. That's the type of firsthand information as an example. Tier 3, convergence, the military, business, economists, if they report the same thing, that's the kind of thing that we're going to say, okay, maybe something is true. We're getting back to the issue of truth. If China is filling a vacuum when we leave, we can see it, we can observe it across multiple sectors. And tier 4, falsifiability. My claim is strategic withdrawal strategic withdrawal ends up costing more than engagement. And we need to be able to prove things wrong. When we show withdrawal where competitors didn't fill a gap and there isn't any crisis in costs, that's when we've been proven wrong. Finally, track record. We can look at past U.S. withdrawals in Somalia, in Afghanistan, in Syria with ISIS, and the whole European migration crisis. When we see that patterns hold, every time we pull back without strategy, costs have multiplied. That's, I think, fair enough to say. The conclusion is we're not saving money, we're deferring maintenance, and the risk premium is paid later when we just simply withdraw. The odd part is we're doing it now with a militaristic twist. We're pulling back on prevention, we're pulling back on supporting governance in other countries, but we're wrapping up our military posture. And as if it's security without a real strategy. We're doing things on the basis of transactionalism and deals as opposed to thinking through the medium and long-term implications of it. So, if ground truth looks like this, what does it mean for stories that both sides are selling us? For those that are promoting the narrative about withdrawal, why withdrawal is perfect and it's a great thing, cutting U.S. aid was the first punch, but that seems to me that we're just blinding a pilot to save on radar. U.S. aid had a lot of problems. I experienced myself with procurement issues where USAID was really fallible. USAID was far from perfect, but that's, I think, a perfect example of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. For those that promote their narrative of unlimited engagement is a good thing, and let's call that the progressive left, moral duty arguments don't land when people can't pay bills. We need concrete self-interest cases to be made instead. There are farmers in different states in Nebraska or Ohio or wherever, or nurses in Phoenix that don't care about helping the world. They do care, though, if China is controlling copper prices that are making electricity expensive and that our grids aren't working as well as they can. And service is not reliable. So there is a reason for us to care about what's going on in the world where we need access to resources. People do care if pandemics reach their town. Obviously, we all experienced that with COVID. So the reality that both sides miss, in my opinion, is that MAGA isn't all wrong about waste. USAID procurement is often as dubious as the Department of Defense, which is probably the poster child for waste. And progressive logic isn't all right. Many nation-building programs weren't appropriate and they weren't feasible. I can tell you, as somebody who worked in Mali for years, Alpha Omar Konaré was the elected president of Mali. He was the democratic darling of Mali and in Europe and the United States for years, and corruption under Alpha Omar Konaré was reported to be, based on all the Malian friends that I had over the years and colleagues, much worse than it was under the dictator Moussa Traoré. So myself, I've seen good programs that are scuttled for bad ones. I've seen bad ones that were funded because they fit the narratives that people wanted. I think reforms are needed across the board, but blanket cuts aren't reform. They're just amputation. The question isn't whether we spend or don't spend. It's what are we spending money on? We need to spend money on things that work if it makes sense to do that. What I'd like to do in the podcast series is get to a synthesis where it's not about America first versus globalism. It's about common sense, self-interest with global ramifications. There are a lot of places that are dismissed as garbage countries but they hold assets that our lives depend on. For example, demographics. Look at demographics. There's 3 billion people under the age of 25 in the global south. Are they future customers of ours in the United States, or are they competitors? Do we not care about 3 billion people under 25 and the implications of that? Disease. COVID reached our shores in weeks. Viruses don't need visas. There's other epidemics that could happen unless we are vigilant and we have warning systems that are telling us that something is about to happen and we have the ability to deal. In terms of talent, there are Indian engineers, there are African entrepreneurs. Do we integrate these people into our society, or do we watch China recruit these people? With security, we spent $2 trillion in Afghanistan. We could have spent millions of dollars and prevented and spent that money in a completely different way without having gotten into a war in Afghanistan that followed from Iraq. In terms of the environment, do the Amazon and Congolese forests, do they matter to us? Do we care about the oxygen we breathe? Do we care about how much carbon is going into the atmosphere so that climate change, is happening or not? We see effects of this, and people just have to look at their insurance bills in Florida or California to know that insurance companies, they're actually billing people for insurance because of climate issues. But then we say that climate isn't an issue. This doesn't make sense. So we have our smartphones need cobalt coming from the Congo. We like coffee, we like cocoa, we like bananas, and those are all coming from countries they're not coming from the United States. But they're coming from countries that people are calling hellholes. The next pandemic is coming from tropical regions that we're ignoring. And in terms of evidence, this is the last tier. China is betting trillions of dollars on the global south. Are they stupid? I doubt it. They're doing it for a reason. It's strategic. But we're acting transactionally. Does this make sense? I just don't see it. So we're going to triangulate data. Again, we're going to go back to if the military, if business and health sector agree, that disengagement is increasing risk, we should think about whether, in fact, we want to continue on a disengagement pathway. Falsifiability. Name one country that has an isolated economy that's succeeded. We seem to be positioning ourselves to go in that direction. I'm a little bit leery, if not scared, of the implications of that. And then track record. We've talked about Somalia. We've talked about Afghanistan and Syria. The reality check is politicians are selling what fires people up, not what evidence is showing. And it's really, we're not applying critical thinking. You don't have to buy it. What I'd like to do now is bridge. For citizens, start with yourself. Ask about any claim. What's the actual cost versus the benefit of any course of action? We are not doing that. We are simply accepting slogans and political partisan positionship on issues that just don't make sense. What evidence supports these positions, and what would prove it wrong? If you think these things through, then you talk to your friends. If you think that what we're talking about in this podcast makes any sense, then you talk to your friends, talk to your community, ask your leaders, show me the numbers that are justifying the courses of action we're taking, and what would change your minds to do things differently. There's an important thing that I've had a lot of experience with in my professional life working in the global South mainly. It's informed consent. Understanding the risks and benefits before major decisions are taken. You can't consent to things you don't understand. And hidden information is really manipulation. It's not really agreement. In the international work that I did that was called Free, Prior, and Informed Consent, the standard that we promote is communities need to understand what's being done and they need to have a real say. The reality is it's very, very hard to accomplish that. Enabling people to be informed requires a lot of work. Usually consultative processes are weak. They're kind of quid pro quo. They're done quickly and not satisfactorily, but yet there are boxes that are often checked that consent has been reached. The reality at home is that in our home right here, right now, is we're really not being consulted on big issues that our elected leaders are, in fact, I don't know if the right word is imposing, but that we find ourselves dealing with as citizens. We instead of debate, instead of conversation, we're in a period of time where rage bait and sloganeering is what's happening on a daily basis. So if you don't have informed consent in terms of medicine, you have malpractice. In international work, if you don't have informed consent, projects fail. In a democracy like we believe we live in, but some people are challenging whether in fact that's the case, bad decisions are made. We get into these partisan wars, and there's a sense of collapse, that things are imploding. And that's the period we're in now. So I'm hoping, for the purpose of these podcasts, that we can come to agree on what constitutes evidence, good evidence, and then we can fight over policy recommendations without making enemies. My role isn't to tell you what to believe. I'm not here to do that. I'm not here to sell rage bait. There's plenty of people that do social media and podcasts that are selling rage bait. That's not my thing. I'm here to walk through information, evidence, try and analyze things in an interesting way, and help you think about whether things could be done differently and if it's worthwhile talking about with others. The next episode, as I said, is going to be about Somali fraud in Minnesota. I was there. I nearly died telling the truth about the fraud that happened, and we're going to apply that same evidence method to what's happened in Minnesota. My kids' generation deserves better. Your kids' generation deserve better. Your grandkids' generation deserve better. Gen Z, if you're listening, you deserve better than just tribal slogans that are applied to you that you're accepting and swallowing. We deserve more evidence for deciding whether we support what's going on or we don't. Thanks for listening. I'm Michael Brown, and this is the Unpopular View.